the dog's teeth clamped down with the kind of certainty that left no room for negotiation. His jaws were locked on a battered, mud-caked backpack, the straps torn and stiff from years of weather. Every tug from his handler only made the animal's body stiffen more, muscles taut beneath the coarse fur, eyes unblinking. The canine wasn't growling, he wasn't thrashing, he was holding as if the pack itself carried some invisible weight his instincts refused to release. The handler, Sergeant Dale Whitmore, had seen plenty of strange moments in his 20 years with search dogs, but this one stirred something, colder. His commands were sharp, rehearsed 100 times before, yet the shepherd didn't move. Not even the lure of his favorite rubber toy, dangled close to his nose, earned a flicker of response. There was something in that silence, in that refusal, that sent a chill through the man's chest. It wasn't disobedience, it was knowledge. The dog knew something he didn't. The clearing around them felt unnaturally still, though the forest pressed in thick with late summer breath. Wind rolled through the trees, carrying the resin-sweet smell of pine needles and damp soil, yet no birds stirred. Even the stream that cut through the undergrowth seemed to whisper more softly, as if it too leaned closer to see. Whitmore's partner, a younger deputy with restless hands, muttered under his breath about wasted time, about dogs going funny when they were tired. Whitmore didn't answer. His gaze lingered on the backpack, the way its faded canvas sagged, the faint bulge at its center that looked neither like food nor clothes. Something about it was wrong. The dog shifted his stance, paws grinding into the loam, tail stiff as a rod. For the first time in years, Whitmore felt the strange unease of being the one not leading. He remembered an old trainer's words sometimes: the animal knows before you do. He crouched slowly, letting his knees crack against the earth. By his leveling with the dog's, the shepherd's pupils were dilated. His breath quick but steady, not the pant of exhaustion but of focus. He wasn't going to let go. Not yet. The younger deputy cursed and drew his boot against the pack, nudging it with careless force. The sound that followed was not what anyone expected. It was faint, dull, metallic, hollow, not the rattle of stones or forgotten gear. It had weight, but not the weight of camping supplies. Whitmore's breath thinned. His eyes met the dog's again, and in that unspoken moment, he understood this wasn't stubbornness, it was warning. A silence spread between the three of them, deeper than the forest's hush, more binding than any command. Whitmore's hand hovered in the air, not over the dog, but over the pack itself. He thought of the missing person reports that had been piling on his desk for months, of the names scribbled hastily by desperate families, of trails that went cold without explanation. He thought of how some things lie hidden in plain sight, until nature, not man, uncovers them. The deputy shifted again, impatience on his face, but Whitmore raised a hand to still him. He knew this moment was delicate, like the pause before a storm. The backpack sat between them like a sealed secret, the kind that doesn't just explain a story but starts a larger one. He didn't touch it yet. He couldn't, not with the dog's jaws holding it, as if the whole world would unravel should he let go. The forest pressed closer. The weight of dusk began to gather in the branches above. Whitmore straightened slowly, his eyes fixed not on his partner, not even on the dog, but on the object that bound them all in uneasy silence. He felt the truth long before he could prove it. Whatever lay inside that old backpack wasn't meant to be found easily, and now that it had been, there would be no turning back. Whitmore's hand lingered above the pack, suspended between impulse and dread. The dog's jaws tightened, the faint grind of teeth against canvas breaking the silence. The air had shifted, no longer the gentle hush of late summer, but something heavier, more watchful. Even the breeze seemed to pause, as if the forest itself was waiting to see what he would do. He lowered his hand at last, brushing the edge of the canvas. The dog's throat released a deep guttural note, not a growl of defiance but a sound of warning. It was the kind of noise that turned a man's blood cool, the raw voice of instinct speaking louder than any command. Whitmore pulled his hand back, unsettled. He had trusted this dog through floods, fires, and more crime scenes than he cared to count. Never once had the animal faltered. If he was resisting now, it wasn't disobedience, it was truth. The deputy shifted, the leather of his belt creaking. "It's just an old bag," he muttered, kicking at the loam. "We've wasted half a day on this." His words rang thin, brittle against the silence. Whitmore didn't answer. He watched the way his partner's boot edged closer to the pack, careless, almost dismissive. The shepherd's tail bristled, every hair rigid. In that stillness lay something more dangerous than a snarl, the readiness to act if provoked. Whitmore stepped forward and placed himself between man and dog, his voice quiet, almost reluctant. "Don't." He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. There was a weight in his tone that made the younger man shift back uneasy. The silence pressed in tighter, thick with the smell of sap and damp leaves. Whitmore's pulse thudded hard against his ribs. He wasn't sure if it was fear of what lay inside the bag or fear of what would happen if they forced it open too soon. The forest gave its first sign of intrusion. A crow broke loose from a high branch, flapping hard, its core cutting across the hush like a cracked bell. The dog startled, jerking the pack, then froze again, eyes narrowed, breath short. Whitmore followed his gaze into the tree line, half expecting movement. Nothing. Just shadows stretched long under the canopy, the kind that tricked the eye. But unease crept up his spine all the same. The dog wasn't just fixated on the pack anymore. Was listening outward. Whitmore crouched low, speaking softly, words meant for the animal alone. "What have you got, boy?" His voice caught faintly in his throat. He didn't expect an answer, but the dog shifted, dragging the pack an inch closer to him, then holding fast again. It was a gesture, deliberate, almost human. "Look," but not. Yet Whitmore felt it as clearly as if spoken aloud. His partner scoffed, masking nerves with impatience. "You're treating him like he's some prophet. It's a dog, Dale." Whitmore rose, his eyes hard. "And he's been right more times than you or me." That ended the words between them. For a moment, only the whisper of pine needles filled the space. Then, from deeper in the woods, a sound rose, soft and distinct, yet undeniable. It wasn't the crow, nor the restless chatter of squirrels. It was human, low and distant. A shout carried on the wind, muffled but sharp with urgency. The dog's ears pricked, head snapping, toward the direction of the call, body taut like a wire drawn too tight. The backpack slipped slightly in his grip, but he snapped his jaws back into place, refusing to release it. Whitmore's gut clenched. One mystery had multiplied into two. Not only the strange weight of the pack, but now the voice someone out there, close enough to hear, far enough to remain unseen. The deputy's hand went instinctively to his radio, his face pale in the fading light. Whitmore raised a hand to stall him. Not yet. The sound had come once and then gone, swallowed by the woods. To call in too soon might scatter more than it gathered. He needed to listen first, to let the forest tell him what it knew. The shepherd turned, pressing the pack closer to Whitmore's boots, then froze again, eyes fixed on the tree line. The air smelled sharper naupine and something else, faint, metallic, carried on the cooling wind. Whitmore knew that scent too well from long nights at crime scenes. His throat tightened. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The forest had its own silence now, brittle and waiting, the kind that comes just before revelation. Whitmore bent slowly, hand hovering once more over the backpack, his skin prickling as if it might burn at the touch. The dog's grip loosened, not releasing but offering. For the first time, Whitmore felt the permission to move. He reached down, fingers brushing the cold canvas. When the voice came again from the woods closer this time, urgent, desperate, impossible to ignore, Whitmore stood over the backpack, the forest air pressing close, heavy with the unspoken. The dog's grip had not loosened, jaw muscles trembling with the effort of holding steady, but his eyes stayed fixed, unblinking, on the faded canvas. The younger deputy shifted, restless, scuffing the dirt with his boot as if sound alone could break the moment. But it didn't. If anything, it deepened the stillness, made the silence between them more accusing. Whitmore reached a hand toward the straps, slow as breath. The dog's body tensed, not in aggression, but in warning. It was the kind of stillness that carried weight, the refusal of an animal that had learned through instinct what a man could not yet see. Whitmore hesitated, then drew his hand back, letting the silence hang. He didn't trust the pack, not anymore. The dog wasn't letting go because something inside did not belong to the careless world. Something inside carried memory, danger, or both. A gust of wind pushed through the clearing, bending the fir branches in a long shudder. Whitmore felt the air cool against his neck, and for a flicker of a moment, he thought of the faces that lined the missing person reports back at his office. The dog's refusal was no longer just strange behavior. It was a line drawn in the soil across it, and the story would shift from suspicion to consequence. The deputy broke first. He muttered about wasting daylight, about calling it in, about not standing around for an animal's superstition. He crouched low, brushing the dog's flank with an impatient hand, and reached for the zipper. The sound was small, a faint metal rasp, but it snapped the dog into motion. His jaws clamped harder, shoulders jerking, pulling the bag away with a low sound, not a growl, but a raw note of possession. The man swore and stumbled back, his face flushed with anger. Whitmore's pulse quickened. He had seen this before, not in this dog, but in others, in fields where death lingered, where scent clung to the air long after blood had dried. A dog did not behave this way for scraps of food or forgotten clothes. This was the stance of guardianship, the body holding on because it knew letting go would expose something that should not be touched too lightly. The deputy demanded they cut the straps, force the issue, end the nonsense. His voice cracked through the trees, but Whitmore barely heard him. His attention was drawn elsewhere, to the forest itself. The stillness had shifted. From beyond the tree line came the faint crack of a branch under weight. Not wind, not a bird, something heavier, something alive. He turned his head slowly, the world narrowing to sound and shadow. The dog heard it too. His ears flicked, his body tightening, but his jaws never lifted from the pack. He stood his ground, torn between guarding what was beneath his teeth and acknowledging what pressed closer through the woods. Whitmore felt the tension run through him as well. The sudden doubling of threat, what lay hidden inside the backpack, and what now moved just out of sight. The deputy hadn't noticed. He was too busy cursing the dog, his hands brushing dirt from his knees. Whitmore raised a hand, low, commanding silence. His partner froze mid-word, eyes narrowing at the sudden shift in tone. The dog's tail stiffened, and the clearing seemed to hold its breath, the crack of another branch. Then stillness. Then nothing at all. Whitmore's throat tightened. He had hunted long enough, searched long enough, to know the weight of being observed. Something was out there, not moving closer, not moving away, just watching. The forest pressed in with its silence, and for the first time the backpack seemed less like an object and more like bait. The deputy swallowed, his impatience curdling into unease. Whitmore's hand hovered near his sidearm, but he didn't draw it. He knew better than to meet silence with steel. Instead, he took a slow step back, his eyes never leaving the shadowed tree line. The dog adjusted his grip on the pack, as if preparing for a tug-of-war that had not yet begun. The wind fell, the air heavy with resin and damp earth, and the first star appeared in the dimming sky above. Whitmore's chest tightened with the quiet certainty that the pack had already changed the ground beneath them, that they were no longer searching, but being drawn. He glanced at his partner, at the unease crawling across the younger man's face, then back at the forest that seemed to hold its own secrets. The moment stretched, taut as wire, until even breath felt too loud. Somewhere beyond the trees, something shifted again. A sound, faint but unmistakable. A voice, low, broken, and human. Whitmore stood above the backpack, his hand hovering in hesitation, the forest air thickening as though it, too, waited for what would come next. The dog's jaws remained locked, eyes unblinking, a silent barrier between human impatience and whatever truth the canvas concealed. The younger deputy shifted again, tapping his boot against the soil, but Whitmore didn't move. He felt the weight of the moment pressing against his ribs, the kind of weight that doesn't belong to objects but to consequences. The forest began to stir around them, a faint wind rustling the high branches. The sound should have been ordinary, but now it carried the suggestion of unease. Whitmore's gaze drifted across the tree line. Light was thinning, that late afternoon gold collapsing into longer shadows, and with it came the sense of being watched. He could not explain why, but the air itself seemed heavier, as though the silence beyond the clearing had thickened into intent. The deputy crouched with a grunt, reaching toward the straps, and in a flash the shepherd's growl broke the stillness, low, guttural, the sound of a warning meant to freeze. It wasn't the playful defiance of a stubborn animal. It was the sound of instinct refusing to let danger pass. The deputy recoiled with a curse, eyes narrowing at the dog as though it were a mutinous soldier rather than a creature bred for protection. "He's lost it," the man muttered. But Whitmore heard something else in the growl. Not madness, urgency. Whitmore's hand fell slowly, not to open the bag but to rest against its side, testing its shape through the dirt-crusted canvas. The bulge inside shifted faintly beneath his palm, and his chest tightened. It was solid, too precise to be clothing. The faint metallic ring they had heard earlier echoed in memory, sharper now, more deliberate. It wasn't just the weight of forgotten gear, it was the echo of something concealed, something hidden with care. He drew back, his breath measured, but his thoughts swarming. For months, the missing names had circled his desk, photographs clipped to fading reports, families' voices breaking over the phone. Could this be the thread that tied them all? His heart carried the question heavily, yet his instincts told him something darker. The forest had held this secret for too long, and perhaps it wanted to keep it that way. The dog released the growl, falling back into that fierce silence, but his body remained tense, every muscle coiled. Whitmore recognized the posture. The shepherd wasn't guarding the pack out of possession, he was guarding them from it. A chill ran through the sergeant, deeper than the wind that touched his face. The deputy, restless, pulled out his phone and lifted it halfway, as though to call in the discovery, but Whitmore raised a hand sharply. "Not yet," he said, his voice low. The younger man scowled but obeyed. Whitmore could feel the decision hardening inside him, the conflict twisting like roots under the soil. This wasn't a moment to summon noise and sirens. This was a moment to listen to the forest, to the animal, to the silence itself. Above them, a crow cut across the dying light, its harsh call cracking the air, then fading into distance. Whitmore's eyes followed its path until it disappeared against the canopy. The world seemed to fold back into stillness, yet that sound lingered in his chest, a reminder that nothing stays hidden forever. He knelt again, closer this time, and the dog's eyes met his steady, imploring. Whitmore whispered more to himself than to anyone else. "What are you trying to keep from me?" The words vanished into the trees, unanswered, leaving only the sound of his own pulse. Then came a faint shift in the distance, too delicate for the deputy to notice. But Whitmore heard it, a branch breaking, not by wind, but by weight. Something moved out there, watching the clearing with the patience of one who knew what the backpack carried. The dog's ears twitched, his gaze lifting from the pack to the shadows beyond, confirming what Whitmore already felt. The sergeant rose, every nerve alive, his hand resting instinctively near his sidearm, though he didn't draw it. His voice, it was calm, steady, but it carried the gravity of command. "We're not alone." The deputy froze mid-breath, eyes darting to the tree line. The dog lowered himself closer to the earth, body rigid, nose testing the wind. The clearing held them in its grip, the backpack a silent anchor at their feet, the forest holding its breath as though waiting for the first move. Whitmore stood there, torn between fear and duty, the weight of what lay hidden pressing against him as heavily as the gaze he now felt in the shadows. He did not touch the pack again, not yet. For the first time in years, he knew with absolute certainty that opening it would not just reveal an answer, it would invite something much larger into motion. And in the gathering dusk, that truth became undeniable. The forest held its breath, the weight of dusk folding over the clearing like a closing hand. Whitmore did not reach for the weapon at his hip. Instead he knelt, his movements slow, deliberate, as though acknowledging that the choice now was not his alone. The shepherd eased forward, jaws still gripping the battered canvas, and only then did Whitmore place his palm on the pack again. The sound, when the zipper finally broke its long silence, was soft, almost reluctant. Inside lay not weapons, nor scraps of camping gear, but a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, its edges worn smooth by time and handling. Whitmore peeled it back, the forest air touching what had been hidden for years. Inside were photographs, brittle with agifaces of young men and women, eyes full of the kind of hope that never met return. Beneath them, a notebook, its cover cracked, its pages filled with neat, urgent script, names, dates, coordinates, evidence of journeys that had ended here, in silence. The deputy swore under his breath, but Whitmore said nothing. His eyes lingered on the first name scrawled across the page, a girl who had vanished the summer he himself had joined the force. He remembered the flyers taped to lampposts, the desperate calls that came to the station, the way the case had gone cold like so many others. Now, in his hands, lay the truth that time had tried to bury. The dog released the backpack at last. His body softened, ears lowering, as if his task had finally reached its end. Whitmore met the animal's gaze and felt a heaviness rise in his chest. Gratitude, yes, but also sorrow. This wasn't a triumph. It was a ledger of loss, opened too late to save but not too late to honor. Around them, the light dimmed further, the forest returning to its own rhythms. A wind passed low through the grass, carrying the faint scent of earth and pine. The deputy reached for his radio, but Whitmore stayed his hand once more. Not out of denial, he knew they would have to call it in, but because he understood the moment demanded quiet first. Some truths deserved silence before the noise of sirens and headlines. He laid the notebook gently back into the pack, not to conceal it again, but to keep it whole. His hands lingered there, rough palms pressing against the canvas, as though grounding himself to the weight of what had been uncovered. He thought of the families who had waited in vain, the unanswered prayers. He thought, too, of his own years on the force, the compromises, the cases shelved for lack of proof. It was not redemption he felt now, but responsibility. The shepherd, nose to the ground, circling once before settling at Whitmore's side. The dog's loyalty had been constant, but Whitmore now saw it differently, not obedience, but a kind of moral compass sharper than his own. The animal had refused to yield until the truth was in human hands. That was his duty, and he had fulfilled it without words. Darkness began to gather in earnest. Through the branches, the first star pressed faintly against the violet sky. Whitmore rose slowly, the pack slung over his shoulder, heavier now, not from weight but from meaning. He let the deputy call in their discovery, his own voice quiet, withdrawn. The forest no longer felt like it was watching. Instead, it seemed to exhale, its tension easing as though it, too, had unburdened itself. Whitmore turned once toward the trees, listening for what he could not name, and found only the hush of leaves settling in the cooling air. Beside him, the shepherd stood tall, eyes reflecting the dim light, waiting without hurry. Whitmore placed a hand against the dog's head, fingers brushing the coarse fur. He didn't thank him aloud. The gesture was enough. They began to walk back through the clearing. The path ahead marked not by certainty but by acceptance. What they carried would not mend what was broken, but it would close a silence that had stretched too long. That, in its own way, was a kind of justice. At the edge of the forest, Whitmore paused. The last light of day slanted across the ground, catching on a single paw print pressed deep into the soil. He let his eyes rest on it, knowing it would fade with rain and wind, but its mark, like the truth they had uncovered, would linger longer than anyone could see.